They never really saw me, not the way I wanted to be seen, not for who I actually was. In their eyes, I was the quiet one, the underachiever, the disappointing offshoot of a pedigreed family tree. I stopped trying to correct them years ago. It was easier to nod, smile, and sip my iced tea while they toasted themselves into oblivion. So when I pulled into the circular driveway of the Ellis estate on a humid evening in late September, I already knew how the night would go. Gold-stemmed wine glasses, imported cheeses no one actually liked, and a ruthless competition over who had acquired the most unnecessary luxury since our last dinner. The Ellises didn't gather for food or bonding, we gathered to perform. I took my usual seat near the stone fireplace, its hearth cold and ornamental, much like the conversation. Around me, the room sparkled with curated opulence. My cousins were already in full form. Grayson, still tan from his third restorative trip this year, casually mentioned just bought a ranch in Jackson Hole, right next to that guy who basically owns Silicon Valley Vivienne, not to be outdone. Let out a soft scoff. We just closed on a vineyard in Tuscany, private access to the Mediterranean. You can't put a price on that kind of exclusivity. I almost smiled. I wanted to ask if she knew Tuscany wasn't a beachfront destination, but why ruin her fantasy before I could disappear further into the background? Aunt Margot's voice cut sharply through the chatter. You've been awfully quiet. Elena Grayson leaned in the smell of cedar cologne and superiority radiating off him. We were just wondering about your living situation. Still in that duplex, right? Alder Street. Vivian, eyes glittering with staged surprise, added, Didn't know people still rented after 30. I set my glass down slowly. I like the space, I replied evenly. They laughed the way rich people do when they think they're being charitable. Margot smiled with patronizing concern. You're 35, sweetie, it's time to grow up. Buy something real. Something real. Like the $1. 8 billion portfolio of commercial towers, historic walk-ups and multi-unit developments quietly owned by Marlowe & Co., a company with no publicly listed executives and zero ties to the Ellis name. Their last 6 family dinners had taken place in Elliswood Tower, a property they still thought they owned outright. I acquired it 6 months ago. Through a discreet buyout, a handful of Delaware LLCs, and a lot of patience, I became the silent majority owner of their legacy without them ever noticing. It was the long game, and I was playing it with every card they thought I lacked. Still renting, Grayson repeated smugly. Wow, I let the silence hang just long enough. Because very soon, those lease renewals they liked to pretend didn't matter. The ones their assistants forwarded without reading would arrive with my name at the bottom, and I couldn't wait to see their faces when it did, Charles. My father finally spoke up from the other end of the table, swirling his Bordeaux. Now, Grayson. Not everyone's blessed with your instincts. His tone was measured, almost regretful, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, the one that said he knew. At least part of it. Aunt Margot sighed. Elena's just chosen a different path. We all wanted more for her, of course, but some people take longer to blossom. They had a whole garden of metaphors for failure. To them, I was the one who never quite bloomed, not married to a hedge fund manager, not hosting curated retreats, not displaying my life on a glossy blog. They didn't know that Elena Marlowe, the family disappointment, was also the founder and sole decision-maker behind the most quietly dominant real estate acquisition firm in the Pacific Northwest. A firm whose ethos was protect tenants, preserve history, and never compromise values for glitz. I built Marlowe & Co. from my studio apartment with a second-hand desk and no outside investment. I built it while they built followers. I built it while they bought chandeliers. But that night I just smiled and nodded. Speaking of real estate, Vivian said with a faux whimsical glance, have you heard about the deal on Alder Street? Some company bought up the whole block. Word is it's going to be demolished. What a shame, guess your little place will be gone soon. I kept my face blank. I was the one who bought it, and I wasn't demolishing anything. The Alder Street complex was one of the last untouched examples of early 20th century brickwork in Portland. Original trim hand-carved cornices shared courtyards with fig trees. It was more than a building, it was history with heartbeat. The plan wasn't gentrification, it was renewal with dignity. We were modernizing interiors while preserving rent, stabilization for families who had been there for decades. Really, I said, haven't heard? Of course you haven't, Grayson laughed. Deals like that are above your pay grade. If only they knew. If you get evicted, Margot said brightly, you can always move into the guest house. We'd be happy to help you find a better place. Maybe even a better companion. I'm content. I said a little more bluntly now, and so is my landlord. Vivian tittered. You can't live small forever, darling. The Ellis name used to mean something. It still did. Just not the way they thought. In real estate circles, Marlowe and Co. was synonymous with ethical growth and sustainable impact, the exact opposite of Grayson's projects that bulldozed communities for clout. Charles cleared his throat. Actually, this dinner has a bit of a business angle that got everyone's attention. He swirled the wine again like he always did when nerves crept up on him. The board's concerned about the new owner of Elliswood Tower. I tilted my head. Finally, a real conversation they bought in 6 months ago, he said. Quietly. No one knows who they are, might be international, some investors like Legacy Real Estate, but they've requested a full audit. I sipped my tea. Of course we had. That audit had already begun forensic style. We were about to find out just how much of the family budget was being padded by business expenses, like Grayson using construction loans to finance yoga retreats, or Vivienne listing her luxury handbags as client gifts. I'm sure it's nothing serious, Margot said quickly, her pearls trembling. The Ellis name still carries weight. Charles shook his head. Not with these people. They don't care about names. They care about numbers and accountability. I watched their faces change. There it was, the first glimpse of fear behind the arrogance. The audit would reveal more than financial anomalies. It would expose how hollow their empire truly was. Maybe Elena can help. Vivian offered suddenly. She's in real estate. Maybe she knows someone who knows someone. They all turned to me like I'd just become useful for the first time in my life. I mostly work with smaller residential clients, I said smoothly. Nothing on the scale of Elliswood. Exactly, Grayson barked. You can't even help your own family. Even Mom didn't defend me this time. She just looked down at her plate. But they didn't know how I was going to help, just not in the way they expected. Tomorrow morning, Marlowe and Co. would release a public statement Elliswood Tower would undergo major operational restructuring. Effective immediately, no more shadow budgets, no more sweetheart contracts, no more billing the building like it was a family credit card. And I was going to walk into that boardroom, not as Elena, the renter, but as the one person who held all the leverage. The next morning was quiet in that heavy, expectant way before a storm breaks. I stood alone in my office, not the studio duplex they mocked, but the real one, the one they'd never seen, a full-floor penthouse above downtown Portland. Floor-to-ceiling windows, restored timber beams, original iron hardware, a reclaimed jewel above a city I had made my own. I wasn't wearing the thrifted cardigan or scuffed boots they loved to mock. Today, it was navy, Altuzara, tailored, clean, soft strength in silhouette form. The kind of outfit Aunt Margot had once begged me to wear to impress a husband. Instead, I was wearing it to dismantle the empire they thought they owned. My assistant Talia entered quietly with a cappuccino in hand. They're all seated, she said, nodding toward the boardroom at Elliswood Tower. The family got there early. Looks like they're trying to charm the independents. I smiled without humor. I could already see Vivian batting her lashes, Grayson holding court like a Wall Street titan. The audit folders are printed, Talia continued. Forensic team flagged some creative line items. Want to call this off? I turned to the glass. Below, the city buzzed. Tiny, unaware Alder Street blinked into view, calm and steadfast like always. No, I said softly. They need to learn legacy isn't a license to exploit. She nodded, lips tight, and handed me the leather case. The kind of case Grayson would have assumed held contracts I barely understood. Today it held their reckoning. When I arrived at Elliswood Tower, the room went still. They hadn't expected me. Grayson was the first to speak, irritation thinly veiled behind forced charm. This is a private meeting. I walked calmly to the head of the table and set my case down. Good morning, I said, and paused. Just long enough. I'm Elena Marlowe, founder and sole owner of Marlowe & Co. The air shifted. Every Ellis at the table froze, even the ones who had spent decades perfecting their performance of composure. Margot's pearls seemed suddenly too tight around her throat. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. Charles's fingers gripped the Mont Blanc pen like it was a lifeline. I'm sorry what Grayson choked. I own this building, I said gently. And several others you've siphoned from, including the Alder Street complex, which for the record is not being demolished. But you show apartments, Vivian stammered. I work, I replied. I built something real. While you curated illusions, I opened the case and slid out the audit folders one by one. These contain documentation of every inflated invoice, every accidental misallocation, every trip labeled as R&D that was actually retail therapy. The board leaned in. They were listening now, truly listening. Let's begin, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Grayson, would you like to explain the $2 million roof repair that coincides exactly with your Jackson Hole purchase? He blanched. That's not, and Vivian? I continued, flipping to the next tab. Your husband's plumbing firm charged 3 times market rate for fixtures that never passed inspection. Care to walk us through that contract? You would air our family's laundry like this. Margot gasped, her voice shrill. I'm not airing anything, I said, still calm. I'm disinfecting it. Charles cleared his throat softly this time. Elena, honey, we can talk through this? There must be some misunderstanding. No, Dad, I said. The misunderstanding was thinking this building was yours to pillage. The misunderstanding was thinking I'd never come home. He looked at me, really looked, and I saw something shatter in his eyes. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was fear, but... Why, Vivian whispered. Why pretend to struggle? Why not just tell us who you were? I wasn't pretending, I said I live, simply because that's how I started. I invest carefully, because I believe in stewardship. You assumed wealth had to be loud. Grayson stared at me, stunned. So you really live on Alder? I do, I replied. And I own the majority of that block, and I kept the units affordable because people live there. Real people, not spreadsheets. The board members began murmuring among themselves. One read aloud from a phone. Marlowe & Co. reveals CEO identity. Elena Marlowe confirmed as the owner of 2 bar in residential and commercial assets. I heard Vivian's phone drop. She's ranked among the most ethical developers in the western United States. Someone else muttered, focus on preservation and tenant rights. This'll ruin us, Vivian whispered. No, I said, finally allowing my voice to firm. This will save you from yourselves. I stood tall. As of today, Elliswood Tower will operate transparently. No more shell games, no more sweetheart deals, and if you push back, I held up the final set of folders, then these go to the authorities, IRS included. Silence thick and absolute. Finally, Charles spoke. What do you want? I looked him in the eye. I want the Ellis name to mean something again, something beyond ego. The room held its breath. You can work with me, I said. Restore this legacy with integrity. Or, find somewhere else to live. I hear Jackson Hole has vacancies. And with that, I gathered the reports, nodded once to the board, and turned to leave. Elena Charles called just as I reached the door. I turned. I was wrong about you. I smiled, not with triumph, but with something quieter. Yes, I said you were. It hit the media like a thunderclap in a quiet canyon. The boardroom confrontation that tore down generations of illusion didn't stay behind glass walls. No amount of PR spin could contain the headline, Mysterious CEO of Marlowe & Co. revealed to be Elena Marlowe, Heiress turns real estate powerhouse. Within hours, I was a headline, a symbol, a contradiction. The family they had pitied was now the one they feared and admired and didn't quite understand. Margot resigned from 3 boards within a week. Something about reputation management. I think she just didn't want to walk into another gala where someone might smile politely and whisper afterward, "Is that the aunt of the Marlowe girl?" Vivian's husband's firm went under by the end of the month. Turns out triple billing the same plumbing job to 3 properties, 2 of which didn't exist, was a bad long-term business model. But it wasn't just fallout. There were glimmers of something else. Something better. Grayson, for one, didn't get indicted, which surprised everyone. Instead, he enrolled in a public university's real estate program. I thought I understood markets, he told me once later. Turns out I didn't understand people, and in his own way, he meant it. Vivian started volunteering homeless outreach of all things. When I asked why, she said, "Because I never knew how to listen. Now I want to start learning." And Charles, he didn't try to win control back. He didn't beg for forgiveness either. What he did was harder. He asked questions. He asked about my strategy, about how I grew from one duplex to a national portfolio without outside capital. He asked about rent stabilization, not as a threat to profits, but as a safeguard to dignity. He didn't try to reclaim what I'd built. He tried to understand it. 6 months after that meeting, I sat cross-legged on the sofa inside my Alder Street apartment, the one I never left even after the world knew who I was. I liked the creak of the original floors, the chipped tile near the sink, the fig tree growing crooked outside the window. It was home. I was reviewing quarterly reports from Elliswood Tower, now more solvent than it had been in years. Tenants were renewing. Small businesses on the ground floor were finally turning a profit. And for the first time, the books were clean. That was when the knock came. I opened the door and found my mother. No makeup, no pearls, just jeans flats and a manila envelope in her hand. "I got your invitation," she said. "The block party." I blinked. "It's just a barbecue neighborhood thing." "I know," she said, glancing around the apartment. "Not really my scene." "No," I agreed, "but maybe it could be." She walked in slowly, stopping to look at a framed photo on my bookshelf. Me, at 23, grinning wildly in a cheap blazer the day I got my real estate license. "I never asked," she said quietly. "Why this path? Why real estate?" I thought about that. About the night I signed the loan on my first property. About the years scraping together renovations with my own hands. About tenants crying with relief when told their rent wouldn't spike just because the market did. "Because I wanted to build something real," I said. "Not just buy things and call it success." She held the photo a moment longer. "And now you own more than all of us." Technically, I smiled, but control was never the point. She nodded and then, in a tone that was entirely new to me, said, "Will, you teach me." The words hung there, light and vulnerable, the kind of request a mother makes when she's no longer trying to lead, but to follow. "Come tonight," I said. "Meet the people who live here. The families who've called this block home for decades. That's where legacy starts." Later that night, I stood at the edge of the courtyard. String lights danced above us. Kids played tag between folding chairs. The air smelled like grilled corn and something sweet, baking 3 apartments over. I watched from the shadows as Margot sat beside Mrs. Ramirez, a tenant here for 38 years, listening intently, nodding as she learned about a neighborhood she never knew existed beyond tax lines. Grayson helped Mr. Donovan, our oldest tenant, and a WY2 veteran string lights over the awning, his jacket sleeves rolled up. He actually looked happy to be useful. Vivian laughed beside a group of children decorating sugar cookies, frosting smudging the edges of her manicured nails. Bit by bit, they were learning that wealth isn't what you flaunt, it's what you preserve. It's not found in beach houses or designer luggage. It's found in what you restore, in the stories you protect, in the dignity you leave intact when you finally gain power. As I refilled the cocoa cups and straightened paper plates, Charles walked up to me, his face softer now, weathered but aware. "You know," he said, "your great-grandfather believed buildings should shelter hearts, not just wallets." I nodded. I found his old ledgers, his notes on tenant protection. "We lost the thread somewhere." He looked at me not like I was a lost daughter, but like someone holding a torch he'd once dropped. "You could have destroyed us." "That was never the goal." I said. "I watched a little girl spin beneath the twinkle lights. I just wanted to build something that would outlast me." Charles was quiet a long time. Then he whispered, "You did." Legacy is a strange thing. When you grow up around people who think legacy means property lines and last names carved into brass plaques, it's easy to believe that power has to look like dominance. But I've learned that real power doesn't show up in marble lobbies or 7-figure auctions. It shows up when you protect someone who can't pay you back, when you create something that will still be kind long after you're gone. Real power is quiet, it's consistent, and it leaves things better than it found them. 6 months after the second block party, we hosted our first community board meeting in Elliswood Tower's new tenant lounge. Vivian brought cupcakes, Grayson handled the AV setup. Margot chaired the welcome committee. No one wore designer labels. No one brought up Tuscany or Jackson Hole. Instead, we passed around note cards with project ideas, tutoring programs, rent forgiveness, grants, cooperative child care. It was a different kind of wealth. one that didn't need to be photographed to matter. Later that week, I got a call from a young woman starting her own property group. She asked for advice, and we talked for almost an hour. At the end, she hesitated and said, "Can I ask something strange? Sure, were you ever scared they were right about you?" I smiled even though she couldn't see it. "All the time," I said. But I kept going anyway. That's the part no one ever celebrates. Not the clapback, not the takedown, not the mic drop, but the ordinary bravery of staying the course when no one claps. The truth is, I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong. I just refused to believe they were the ones who got to decide what was right, and that made all the difference. Now, if you've listened this far, maybe something in you has felt what I felt: underestimated, overlooked, doubted into silence. And if you have, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't need applause to begin. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need a trust fund to build something lasting. You just need conviction. You need integrity. And you need the courage to build something even when they call it small, because sometimes the life they scoff at becomes the standard they're forced to learn from, and sometimes the person they dismissed ends up holding the map. I hope this story reminded you that your quiet work matters, that your integrity matters, that how you show up, especially when no one is watching, will shape everything you build. So drop a comment below. Tell me, what have you been building in silence? What dream have you been protecting in the shadows, waiting for your moment? Let's talk about it. Let's give each other credit for the hard work, the long nights, the deep values that don't trend but endure. And if this story moved you, if it gave you even 1 ounce of fuel to keep going, consider subscribing to this channel. We've got more stories ahead. Stories of resilience, redemption, and real success. The kind that doesn't just look good on paper, but actually helps people. Because in the end, legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming exactly who they said you couldn't be. So stay with me. Let's build something that lasts. A week before Christmas, we threw a second party, not out of tradition, but because the first one had actually meant something. This time, people brought more food than they took. Someone's kid made garlands out of paper grocery bags. An older tenant brought his accordion. I stood by the garden fountain, the one with the chipped cherub that everyone said we should fix, but no one really wanted to. And I watched. My family, for all their missteps, was adjusting. Margot had stopped wearing pearls and started learning names. Vivienne was organizing a fundraiser for a local shelter. And Charles showed up early and stayed late. He came to stand next to me as snow began to fall. You know, he said, I used to think legacy was inheritance, buildings, wealth, reputation. And now he looked at me. Now I think it's something we build that teaches others how to carry it forward. We stood in silence. I found the old blueprints, I told him. The original plans your grandfather drew. The notes in the margins. They weren't about profit. They were about people. He closed his eyes. We forgot. I nodded. But we can remember again, he didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. It was in the way he turned toward the courtyard and walked slowly but deliberately into the very community he once viewed from a penthouse balcony. That night, I realized something else. The most powerful revolutions don't always come from shouting down the old world. Sometimes they come from quietly building a better one beside it. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly counted out, then maybe you see a little of yourself in me. I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to build something real. Something that couldn't be taken away because it was rooted in values, not vanity. If my story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? What have you built in silence while others doubted you? Let's talk about it. Let's give each other credit for the quiet work, the long nights, the tough choices. And if you're facing a moment like I once did when the world expects nothing from you, don't shout louder. Just build stronger. You don't need approval to begin. You need purpose and consistency. The rest will come. Support this journey by subscribing to the channel. There are more stories ahead about resilience, redemption, and redefining success on your own terms. Because legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you create. And sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It's becoming exactly who they said you couldn't be. So subscribe, stay with me, and let's build something that lasts.